Hello folks, if you've been following me for the last couple of years, you know what I've been working on. Well, today I'm about to unveil the final piece of that puzzle. It's Bushel, the macOS virtual machine app designed by developers for developers. You've seen it grow, and now it's ready to revolutionize your app development process. With Bushel, you have the power to snapshot and roll back your machine effortlessly. Just like saving your game process, it's the tool you've been waiting for. No more compatibility worries. Bushel lets you explore diverse macOS versions and configurations, ensuring your app's flawless performance. The wait is over. Bushel is now available for pre-order, so get ready to unlock the ultimate app development experience. Save the date. Bushel drops on December 15th, continuing our journey together in redefining app development. Pre-order today, and let's build something incredible with Bushel. Your support has brought me this far, and I can't wait for what's ahead. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of this episode. Welcome to another episode of Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dion. Today, I'm joined by Alaina Kafkes. Alaina, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Leo. It's cool to get to chat with you, and I think this is maybe the first iOS podcast I've ever been on, so yes. Exciting for me as well.
Yay! I was really excited to have you on. It's a topic I've been interested in, was today's topic, which is app intents. Read your article about your work at Calm. But before we begin, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I am a senior software engineer at Calm right now, and I, throughout my career, have primarily focused on iOS, which has been very cool. I honestly feel like it was something that I fell into, and I feel incredibly lucky to have done so. I guess besides working, I feel like my outside of not like a passion project, but I find it fun to go speak at conferences. So you might see me on the iOS conference circuit, or you might have already if you're around.
Any future conferences you're going to be at?
No, but I'm contemplating 2024. I'm
not
sure what I want to do yet, but I'll think about it very soon.
Yeah, it's a great experience. I love speaking at conferences. I think I will be speaking at least one conference next year I know of. So be on the lookout for
exciting.
That. But yeah, it is exciting. It's a great experience. I highly recommend people give it a shot and fill out a CFP. So let's talk about app and let's jump right into it. Well, first of all, what are app intents? Maybe let's start with that before we jump into the why.
That is a good question. So app intents is a framework. It was released by Apple in WWDC 2022. And as Apple phrases it, it is a programmatic way to make your app's content and functionality available to system services. So my read of that sort of Apple speak is basically it allows users, or app intents are a way to allow your users to take an action within your app using something like Siri or the Shortcuts app, Spotlight, and then also the action button on some devices. And a good example would be if you say hey Siri, do X, that might be invoking an app intent.
Yeah, so it's kind of how do I put it? It's a framework which upon you could do other things, such as Siri. The one that I keep thinking of is when I constantly accidentally turn my wrist on my watch and it shows me the calendar, and then I'm on my Mac and it says, hey, by the way, has a little thing at the bottom, in the dock where it shows calendar, watch. And I'm like, yep, that's right. I did accidentally load up my watch. So yeah, that's what I'm familiar with. But why kind of what was the maybe business decision? I don't know how much you're going to answer this, but how much was it of a business decision was it to be hey, let's do app intents for Calm? What was the thought process on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I feel like Calm chose to pursue creating app intents. Actually, I'm going to rephrase a little bit. So Calm had pre-existing SiriKit intents. but we actually implemented them wrong. That's my understanding after
Okay.
working on this project. So we ended up like ditching that old buggy implementation that wasn't really worth maintaining. And like when we saw app intents at WWDC 2022, so like that was kind of like a technical motivation. Another technical motivation would
Okay.
be getting more comfortable with like, sorry, with like async await and main actor.
Yeah, I remember that in
My
the
bad.
article. Yeah, because
Yeah.
you wanted to take the opportunity to upgrade to async await, and that was part of what App Intense was doing as
Yes.
well, right?
It was a good little trial, and then there were like the business reason was kind of like we had started to shift our focus more to user engagement because we realized that lots of people download the Calm app in like a time of crisis, but sometimes
And
they
forget about
like
it.
don't, yeah, they forget about it, or like they see the home screen and they're like, now what? So we have been pursuing a lot of like projects around like better engaging our users with the app, like giving them like what they want and something that they would want to come back to from like a mental health perspective.
Does App Intense replace Siri Kit, if you know what I mean? In the
Yeah,
sense
so
that,
this is a great question,
yeah.
and I'm gonna call out. I made a mistake here when I went into this project. I did not know the answer to this question, and I found out the answer quite late in the game. So, app intents do not replace Siri Kit. So, app intents are basically what you should be using for custom intents that aren't already supported by Siri Kit. Like Siri
Okay.
Kit, for instance, has like I don't know, like play media intent. I know there are others. There are like
Right,
subclasses
right.
of ION intent that you should be using if they exist and if they meet your need. But if they don't, then app intents is better.
Okay, okay, that makes total sense. Um, so that was interesting. Like a big thing you mentioned was user engagement, which is super difficult
Mhm.
with apps because we all think, oh, the success is getting someone, a getting your app built, getting approved from the Apple Store, and then getting people to download it. Well, that's all great, but like if nobody is using it, like you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
So the user engagement, like that seems like a big selling point for you implementing this in your app. Um, what do you think are some like Calm? We all know what Calm does, but like what would be some other apps that you think would be ideal for implementing this in their application?
Ooh, that's a good question. Before I answered, I realized that I might not have been entirely clear on why app intents even relate to user engagement, and I just wanted to call out that like when you use the app intents framework, you are able to get kind of this like auto magical exposure of your app intents to like Siri, shortcuts, and Spotlight as soon as the user downloads the app. So I just wanted to
Siri
make that
shortcuts and
super
okay,
clear.
okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
But to actually answer your question of like what sorts of apps should be using app intents, um, I think that like the generic answer would be like an app in which you could imagine a, a user actually wanting or needing to invoke actions via Siri. So I don't know. Siri is just the thing that pops into my head when I think of app
Right,
intents. I
right,
think of shortcuts like secondarily, but another like a something that I've read about, but I'm not like a total expert in necessarily, is that Siri is often used by people with certain like neurocognitive differences.
right.
And I actually heard in a conference talk by, I believe, Robin Kanatsar, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her last name right, that like
Okay,
offering multiple ways to do the same thing, to take the same action, is great from an accessibility perspective because like maybe all of these different ways are accessible to me, but like for someone, one way, one path of entry into the app is like more accessible than another, or like one way of doing an action would be more accessible than another, so
right,
that
right.
redundancy can be positive from an accessibility perspective.
The short to me, like not the shortcuts, but the spotlight seems like a big selling point because like if I'm gonna pull up my phone and like try to search for something, and it's like, hey, by the way, here's your directions to so and so, or here's why don't you go to Starbucks thing, it's gonna be like a little bit more tempting for me to use the app. And like that to me is one of the bigger selling points, is that it, from my understanding, is it uses intents to figure out when you're more likely to use the app, and then
Yeah,
suggest it in Spotlight. And to me, like that's a big gain if you're trying to get user engagement.
that's very fair. It's like subtle but powerful because I am using Spotlight regularly, but I don't think that I'm using Spotlight regularly because like I mean I would guess that your average like iPhone user does not necessarily know that that feature is even called Spotlight. They're just like, oh, it's the search thing,
Right.
so it's
Right.
subtle.
Right. Yeah, yeah, totally. Exactly. What's the relationship, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what's the relationship between app intents and NS user activity? Are those related in any way, or is
Ooh,
that something totally different?
that's a good question. I think that they're different. They might be related, but I did not end up using any of the like NS user activity APIs for this
Okay.
particular project. I think
Okay.
that the way, if I'm not mistaken, but like there is like this concept of donating intents that comes from SiriKit, and it's like really
Okay.
odd
Okay.
phrasing. But what donating
It's
intents? It's like what?
what
Yeah, it took me
what
a
generous.
moment.
How generous of you. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
and basically it's like that is like another way of telling Spotlight like, hey, this user is like taking this particular action, like they're playing this particular piece of content within the call
Right.
map at this particular time of day, and then
Right.
maybe you would start to see Spotlight suggestions at that time of day.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I wanted to ask next what your biggest challenge was, but before we do that, I'm gonna hop back, and I'm gonna ask this technical question because you mentioned it in the article and you mentioned it earlier. But like async await, what was that experience like migrating or implementing using async await in Calm?
So great question. Like to be super clear, the majority of the Calm app does not use async await. There are just like some places where we have been bringing like
Yeah,
I don't know
makes
new
sense. It's
things
a
and
big
using it.
app. You're not gonna like go in and overhaul it. Yeah, it totally makes sense.
But honestly, for me, the concept wasn't difficult. And I think it was because at my previous job, I had written some, I guess, like backend, like JavaScript code that had similar
Well, not
concepts, if that
promises,
makes
but
sense.
yeah, yep,
Yeah,
totally,
like
one
based
hundred percent.
effectively promises.
Yeah.
So for me, the learning curve had already happened in
Yep.
like another programming language.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, I'm in the same boat. It was JavaScript or C Sharp that had already done
Mhm.
async await essentially, so it wasn't too much of a challenge. But what was the whole how to deal with tasks, like doing multiple tasks at the same time. The whole actor concept is still something I feel like I'm trying to wrap my head around. So that's probably more of
Same,
the challenge.
fair.
But yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, fair, yeah, good. It was, yeah, I think we have same experience there. Um, so besides that, what was the biggest challenge implementing app intensive? What kind of like issues did you run into?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the overarching answer is just the I think that the framework it came out in WWDC 2022 and my like me and like my fellow engineers started working on this, let's say like a few months after that. So just the newness of the framework meant that there was nothing on Stack Overflow, nothing, no answers on the developer forums, and then like the documentation, sometimes you would just see the I don't know if it said like beta software, but it was just like, okay, you can't trust anything written here.
Yeah,
So
and on
just
top of it, it's an abstract framework, right? It's not like,
yeah.
oh, I know exactly this is for doing virtual reality on the Vision Pro. Like you can
Mhm.
know exactly what it is. This is a very, like you said, it uses certain terms like donate and intent that are
Yes.
very abstract. So yeah, I could see how the challenge is there.
That's a really good point too. But I will say that I think the most concrete challenge, at least for me, was string localization, and that might be because I was working within like this, I don't know, pre-existing legacy app, if you will. And
Hmm.
we already have like strong like scripting and automation around like converting NS localized strings into, or like converting them into like a file format that like a translator could read and like make translations of and then get back to us with those translations and have that just automatically like get into like the app store builds we submit.
Hmm.
So the app intense framework requires this new type called localized string resource that just doesn't like play in the same way as
Yeah,
NS
yeah.
localized string. So like bridging between those, I mean, I had to do some honestly kind of shady things that I wouldn't recommend, but like I think that's just sometimes true within like a legacy app environment. But if you're just like
Okay.
trying this for like a side project, you'll be fine. Like,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Um, what? So string localization. Anything else you ran into that you were surprised by when you were implementing it?
That is a good question. Let me think about this. I think that this may be Calm specific, but I when I was implementing App Intense, I noticed that whenever I was doing something, some sort of action within an app intent that would touch Realm, I had to be like very careful with the threading. Like I was just wondering why things weren't working or why the app
I was
was
gonna ask
crashing,
about
but that was challenging. I like somehow the specifics have like left my mind, which is maybe a good thing in a way.
that.
But like I remember generally that was difficult and that was not a challenge that I wrote about in the blog post that I published for Calm.
So what were some architectural challenges that you ran into with App Intense? Like is it an extension or is it part of the app itself? Or and like how did you have to work around the existing infrastructure to get it to work properly?
That is a good question. So I did not implement this as an extension. I'm pretty sure that there are two paths with app intents, either just adding the intents to your, I guess, main target
Hmm.
or creating an extension. I think both are valid. If I recall correctly, in the documentation, Apple says that it is best to just implement them within the main target, and the
Okay.
extension is kind of like, I don't know. There was some like exception, but the
Okay.
Calm app did not meet that exception.
Okay. Okay.
Um, for architectural challenges, fortunately, like these app intents are basically these like I don't even know. They're not really touching like other parts of the Calm app. I think that the biggest technical challenges were like working with Realm and like the threading concerns that come up there. And
Yeah.
then the string localization, that was not, it's not so much like an architecture thing, but like we have all these like scripts and automated processes, and this new localized string resource type just doesn't naturally fit into them. So
Okay. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What are so let's kind of break down the components of app intents. So you talked about donating. What do you mean when let's start off with what's an intent exactly?
yeah, that is definitely a good question. So I'm trying to remember what the Apple specific definition is and like how I can translate that. But I think because it is super abstract, I think that like an intent is like I just think of it as like a piece of functionality or like a an action that you can take within the app. Like for instance, on Calm, you can play the daily Calm or like one of our like content types.
Okay.
But there also could be an app that's like or sorry, there could also be an app intent for like a different app that's like rate this book or whatever, and you have this like mini UI pop up.
Yeah.
So they're just
Does it take parameters or is it specifically just one specific thing that it does?
that's a good question. So does take parameters if you so choose. Like you can have like an app intent that only does one thing, doesn't need parameters. But yes, the app intent that you create can take parameters that kind of like change what it does slightly, or more like variations on a theme, if you will. Like,
Yep.
for instance, in the Calm app, we have, I believe, four types of daily meditation. So, meditations where you get a new one every day. So, I
Yeah.
created an app intent with a parameter that's like daily meditation type that allows you to play each of those four dailies by like invoking basically the same command on Siri. It's like, hey Siri, play the daily Calm on Calm. Hey Siri, play the daily Trip on Calm, etc.
Okay.
Like you can tell
Okay.
that there's like a little bit of a string formula there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, that makes total sense. So, what other components are there to app intents?
Yeah.
Is there anything you need to do like in an app delegate? Is there anything special you need to do with Swift UI, I guess?
Yeah, these are good questions. So, in Re Swift UI, if you were to create, so Calm doesn't does Calm does not do this. First of all of the Calm app intents just like start playing content. So there's no like UI needed there.
Hmm,
But
hmm.
in the example that I mentioned, that's like rate this book as an
Right.
app intent, you could create like a little mini user interface using Swift UI. The name for that escapes me, but there is like a specific way of doing this within the app intents framework.
Probably something
Uh,
like widgets, I would assume.
yeah, it's very widget like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That would make sense.
Yeah, I think in terms of other components that I think are worth knowing about, there is this concept of an app shortcut, which is distinct from an app intent. Like sounds extremely confusing, but app shortcut is just like a way of making your app intent something that the shortcuts app can access.
Okay.
Like, I know it sounds like very silly when I say it right now, but yeah.
No, but it makes total sense. It makes total sense. Oh, what was the other thing I was going to ask? Is there anything you have to do with like in like the info p list or in the app settings to get this going and get it started?
Good question. Oh yes, you mentioned the app delegate as well. No, actually, unlike I believe with Siri Kit, you do have to add this to. I don't know if it was the info p list or somewhere, some sort of more like
Right.
app settings situation.
Right. Yeah. So you add the app intent to your application just by implementing a specific protocol, and that's it.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it is very nice.
Yeah, yeah.
And
You don't have to like. Yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say to your point, app intent is a protocol. Like I didn't say that when I was trying to come up with like how to like precisely define it earlier, but yes, app intent is a protocol, and you just like make something that conforms to that protocol that does an action within your app.
And then it just tells the OS, "Hey, these are the things I can do." Okay, that's
Mhm.
awesome. Um, did you do so? Calm is also a watch app. Was there any difficulties, or how did that work as far as the watch app and app intents? Did you have app intents for the watch and the phone, or what was the relationship there?
Great question. So I only implemented app intents on the phone, not on the watch. I actually did work on the Apple Watch app though. That was like a whole other project, a whole other fun
Congratulations!
drama.
Welcome to the club of WatchOS app developers. Yeah,
Yes, yes, it was a wild time, but a different story.
yeah. Was this sorry? Was this WatchKit or was this Swift UI?
It was Swift UI. So we had a
Oh, thank God.
WatchKit app,
Okay.
and I converted it to Swift UI, and that was
Yeah, I'd
yeah,
imagine.
another project. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, cool. Um, well, I was gonna ask if you know anything about multi-platform support when it comes to app intents. I don't know if you know anything about that because you
Oof,
did some watch stuff. Do you
I do
know?
not, sadly. I know
Okay.
that Siri Kit. I feel like I remember seeing a WWDC talk some years ago about Siri Kit and multi-platform intents, but I don't know if I ever saw that in the app intent like documentation or the WWDC videos I watched. Like, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that I don't know how, haven't been exposed to how. Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Was there anything else you wanted to mention about App Intense or the work you're doing at Calm right now?
That's a good
Out?
question. I will say that even though there were like a lot of struggles that I encountered while working on this App Intense project, we actually did see some like uptick in user engagement. So you could say that it was worth it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Totally. Um, would you, if you were going to build an indie app, what would be your decision process? Well, would you just say, yeah, definitely doing App Intense, or would there be some like decision process where like, I don't know if this is really worthwhile?
Yeah, no, great question. I feel like to me, App Intents aren't necessary unless you can imagine like a strong use case for your app via something like Siri. Or like to your point about Spotlight and like those suggestions being meaningful, if you feel like that would be meaningful, then you should go for it. I think that the accessibility case that I made earlier can also be compelling. It just very much depends on the context of like your app and your user base or your hoped for user base.
Okay, fair enough. Alaina, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, great question. I can be found on Twitter at Alaina Kafkes. I will say that I'm currently locked out of my Twitter account. Don't know why, so I gotta resolve that. But if that is an issue and you still need to contact me, you can find me on LinkedIn if you would like.
Awesome. Alaina, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Leo. It's been cool. Like the good refresher on the work that I did, and I feel like talking about things and talking about things again always increases my own understanding of them too. So
yeah,
useful for me as well.
Yeah. People can find me online on Twitter or X or whatever it's called at LeoGDion. My company is Bright Digit. I'm on Mastodon as well at LeoGDion at c.im. Consider supporting the podcast and the YouTube channel. We have our Patreon account, so definitely check that out. Patreon.com/BrightDigit. And if you saw this on YouTube, please go ahead and like and subscribe or give us a review. If there's something you want to talk about, are you going to be speaking at a conference or anything, just reach out to me. I'd love to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you again. Bye, everybody.